I just realized I was muted. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll get started around 5:30. We'll get going right around on time. Thanks. Good evening, everybody. It's 5:30. We'll wait maybe just another minute, and then we'll get right into things. Thank you for joining us. All right. Let's get started, everybody. Thanks for joining us. It's a great evening. We're happy you're here. We're here to talk about the Cory Merrill Multimodal Safety Improvement Project, and we're really appreciate you joining us for the evening and taking some time out. My name is R.O.W. Chavez. If you guys want to move to the, yep, there we go. R.O.W. Chavez, I am a community engagement specialist with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, and I'll be your moderator tonight. We also have Brendan Paradise. He's our planning lead, and Craig Long, he's our construction lead. Ashley Grace, she's the community designer in the area, and John Johnson, he's going to be managing the questions for us as they come in. We also have Emily Cushman from our engineering team, and she's going to be helping answer some questions as well. So orientation, yeah, just a few housekeeping items. Due to the current situation we have around COVID-19, we are implementing new ways to engage and connect with our community. These virtual meetings, you know, they're still a little bit new to us. We have some under our belts, but please bear with us as we go through the evening in case of any technology snafus or mishaps. Just hang in there with us. And in this environment, we really do appreciate you being mindful, considerate, and respectful to everyone in the meeting tonight, including the DOTI staff. And in terms of participation, there will be a Q&A bar at the bottom of your screen there. You should be able to see it. And you can type in your questions there. John will be working very diligently in the background to get me those questions, and I'll ask as many as possible during our scheduled Q&A time. If you are calling in on the phone, you can submit some questions via the city's website, and that is denvergov.org/SRTS, Safe Routes to School. There will also be a few polls during the meeting, so we'll be seeking your input on those, and those will just pop up on the screen. We'll take a few minutes to answer those, and then we'll kind of keep moving. We've got several people in on the phone tonight and the online here with us. So in order for everybody to hear the presentation and to weigh in equally, we are keeping the audience muted. And just as in a face-to-face meeting, I do like to remind people that we may not get to all the questions in the time that we have allotted for the evening and during the scheduled Q&A time, but there will be materials available after the meeting, including a recording of this presentation, a fact sheet, and possibly a few frequently asked questions sheet that we'll work on putting together for you. And those materials will be available at the denvergov.org/SRTS. Brendan will also be your main contact for questions, and his email is there, brenden.paradis@denvergov.org, just for those on the phone. So the purpose of the meeting tonight is to provide a brief project overview and background, and to give you some updates on several of the bike and sidewalk design improvements planned for the neighborhood. And just as with most everything in life, there are some trade-offs. So we'll be talking about some of the impacts we can expect as we do make improvements that will increase the comfort and safety and mobility throughout the neighborhood. And as I mentioned, there will be several opportunities for the questions and some polling. So with that, let's go to our first poll. You should see it here right on your screen. We just want to get an idea of who's with us tonight, who's joining. So the question, what is your primary connection to this project? So do you live in the neighborhood? Do you have a student that attends school at Cory Merrill campus? Do you work in the neighborhood or in the area? Or do you commute through the area? And then there's others. So take a minute here and answer the question. Again, what is your primary connection to the project? Take just another minute. All right, let's see what kind of results we have. Okay, 50% of folks, looks like you live in the neighborhood. And then we do have about 13% who have a student who attends the Cory Merrill campus, and 25% are others. So I'm interested to kind of know what some of the other folks are interested in learning about tonight. But a lot of people do live in the area, so that's great. And so we'll go ahead and get started. Kick it off, Brendan.
Actually,
I'm
going to take over first. Thank you, Afor. And as aforementioned, just a reminder, we are going to record this meeting, or it is being recorded. So if you know folks who were unable to attend this evening, you can definitely distribute to them afterwards. So thanks, Afor, and hello, everyone. We appreciate you joining us and taking time out of your day on this evening to learn more about the improvements in Cory Merrill. My name is Ashley Grace. I am a project manager and a community designer for Southeast Denver. That means I work closely with the council office and with the community members to better understand their needs and concerns. And I also work with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure to help coordinate major transportation projects within Southeast Denver. So to start off, this slide is really here just to make sure everyone knows where we are, what we're talking about, where the location of all these improvements is. So as a quick overview, most of these efforts are going to be within the yellow boxed area, Florida kind of being the southern or the northern boundary, Iowa the southern boundary, where we have a project that'll extend all the way to Race Street, kind of South High School area, and then on the eastern boundary we have Steele. This slide, which I apologize is a bit busy, illustrates the history that has brought us to where we are today as it relates to all the improvements we're going to discuss. One of those improvements that we will be talking about is a bike lane on Florida. This was originally identified all the way back in 2011 with our first Denver Moves bicycle planning effort, which was reconfirmed in the update in 2015. Both processes included community outreach. Then in 2018, we had our first public meeting with the Cory Merrill community to specifically address the safe routes to school concerns, particularly around Cory Merrill campus. We followed that up with several more communities and steering committee meetings through the summer of 2018. We were then able to move forward with defining the safe routes to school portion of this project, and primarily those sidewalks, and we were able to identify funding to begin design for those multimodal improvements in the neighborhood. So then throughout 2019, we were able to kick off the design, and as that design was moving forward, we worked very hard within the Department of Transportation Infrastructure, not only to keep that safe routes design program moving, but also identify other near-term multimodal improvements that are planned for the area, which I'll talk about on my next slide. At the same time, we also had to work through a number of very important policy decisions. As we'll discuss, as part of this project, we are installing new sidewalks in a well-established residential area, which is precedent setting for our department. As a result, this has moved forward, it's been really important for us to ensure that we are making design and implementation decisions with future projects in mind, making sure we can fairly and equitably replicate this kind of project in other neighborhoods throughout the city. So now the design is just about finalized, and so we want to come back to you all, the Cory Merrill community, provide an overview of what this project entails, and to ensure folks are aware of the construction that will begin this summer, which again, we're going to talk about towards the end of this presentation. As I mentioned in the last slide, we have worked really hard to identify all the anticipated near-term Department of Transportation and Infrastructure improvements in the area so that we can bundle them into one larger construction project. This is not only a cost savings for the city, but importantly, it minimizes the construction impact to you all in the community because it allows us to construct multiple improvements as one larger project, as opposed to a bunch of one-off, uncoordinated efforts that could take multiple years to implement. So the bottom half of this slide shows you just how many efforts we are coordinating, which is why, again, it is taking a little bit longer for us to design and get to this point. We'll talk through the specifics of the sidewalk and the bike projects. And before we end, we have a map that shows exactly where all of these improvements are occurring. But the list includes the sidewalks on Florida and Iowa, a striped bike lane on Florida from Race to Steel Street. We'll be rebuilding the signal at Florida and Steel. This entails primarily upgrading the infrastructure that exists there today, which is a span wire signal, which is an old type of infrastructure. We'll be replacing that with a pole and a mast arm that allows us to implement better technology, signal heads, all that good stuff. We'll also be making the existing paint and post bump out that's on Florida and Steel on the southeast corner. We'll be making that concrete. And finally, all of this will be happening in coordination with our paving of Florida, which will be occurring this summer. Let me move on to the next slide. And I think that brings us back to you, F4.
All right, I had to make sure I unmuted there. Okay, so our second poll for the evening, what are you most interested in hearing more about at this meeting? So it should have popped up right there on your screen. What are you most interested in hearing more about? Sidewalk improvements on Florida, sidewalk improvements on Iowa, the bike lane on Florida, intersection improvements at Florida and Steel, paving, everything, nothing, or none or other. So what are you most interested in hearing more about tonight at this meeting? All right, we'll take another 5 seconds. And then we'll close down the poll and see what we have here. Okay, wow, this is pretty split. So we've got 20% of people have responded almost to every single question here. We've got 20% want to hear about the sidewalks on Florida, 20% want to hear about the sidewalks on Iowa, the bike lane on Florida, intersection improvements, and everything else. So we've got a good variety of things to talk about tonight. Hopefully you'll get all of your questions answered. So we'll keep on moving through.
All right, thanks all for. My name is Brendan, and I've been helping lead this project as part of the Safe Routes to School program. The focus of the material I'll be presenting will explain the where, the why, the what, and the when of the sidewalks that are involved in this project. Next. But before I go into details specifically about the sidewalks that are a part of this project, I first wanted to provide just a brief overview explaining what is public right-of-way. This is a question we've been repeatedly receiving, so we wanted to find a definition about what is the public right-of-way. So this definition was pulled from Blueprint Denver 2040, and it states that the public right-of-way is an area of land owned or controlled by the city for the purpose of constructing, operating, maintaining public facilities, which include streets, alleys, sidewalks, and bike paths for the needs of transportation, utilities, and other public infrastructure. Now, this information is relevant for this project because we want to reiterate that all the improvements part of this project will be constructed within the public right-of-way. Next. But in addition to the question received about what is public right-of-way, we're often asked, well, where is it? So like the definition states, public right-of-way is land owned or controlled by the city. So it is the area outside of private property boundaries. This slide is showing that the blue box is all private property. And then everything outside of that blue box and the purple line is public right-of-way, which again is the area where the sidewalks, the curb ramps, the bike lanes, the signals will be constructed. Next. And as Ashley mentioned, this project is really precedent setting. And for context, Denver's approach to building sidewalks has two overarching program approaches, the neighborhood sidewalk construction and neighborhood sidewalk repair. Now this project falls under the neighborhood sidewalk construction because its purpose is to address building sidewalk gaps with a focus on providing access specifically for schools for this project. With these two programs, the sidewalks and any other improvements are always constructed in public right-of-way. Next. For many of the sidewalk programs in the city, a major first step is to identify all the sidewalk gaps throughout the city. Now, the image on this slide is only showing existing gaps just in the Cory Merrill neighborhood. As I'm sure you can imagine, there's far greater need than funding available to build every gap identified. So as a result, prioritization of gaps is evaluated to immediately move forward with designing and constructing sidewalks where possible. Some of these prioritization components include things such as equity, connectivity, project coordination opportunities, areas around schools, transit, and minimizing where we can impacts to forestry, Excel, or other utilities. And for this project, Cory Merrill was identified years ago by the community for increasing access and safety to and from the school. This project continued to move forward after those conversations and larger project coordination to construct sidewalks, bike lanes, curb ramps, new signals, repaving, since this project will be focused on providing access to transit in schools in particular. Now, here in the yellow is the area expressed by the community as having the highest priority, which is an area of where we're going to be building sidewalks for this project. Next. As a result of the community engagement, funding for design and construction, and coordination with other city departments, that is a major reason for moving forward designing and constructing sidewalks on Florida from Clayton to Steele, because it helps to create a continuous path on the north side of the street for students to access the Cory Merrill campus. It helps also create safer walking conditions for residents in the community, and it had the least amount of forestry and Excel impacts for this project. Next. So the image on the screen is a recent photo of existing conditions on Florida looking west near Steele. Next. And as was mentioned earlier, project coordination was a huge part of this project, and in order to maximize our efficiency in funding and project delivery, we were able to partner with our Elevate Denver Go Bond sidewalk program to design and build the sidewalks on Iowa from University to Columbine, as a way to really help fast track and design and construction of those segments in particular. This coordination also helped to facilitate a cost savings for that program and the Safe Routes to School program. These segments on Iowa were prioritized due to proximity of transit routes on University. The other criteria of the Go Bond program are shown here on the screen. Next. Now this image is a recent photo of existing conditions on Iowa looking east near Josephine. Next. Now for the nitty-gritty details. This is a breakdown explaining each piece of the sidewalk cross section that we are making sure to design in most areas where we can for this project. A conversation was already held a few weeks ago with abutting property owners where these sidewalks will be constructed in order to provide information about potential impacts the installation of these sidewalks may have. The standard design we are following for the sidewalk is a 5-foot tree lawn and a 5-foot sidewalk width per our Denver Moves Peds and Trails standards. However, the cross section shown on the screen may vary depending on constraints such as trees or other conditions we are trying to design around if possible. There may be areas along Florida and Iowa where it will be necessary due to the grade or steepness in the land that we will have to install a retaining wall, but we'll go over those details later. Next. The slide here is just showing a rendering of what the construction conditions with the sidewalk built could look like. Again, just want to emphasize that all improvements will be completed in the public right-of-way. Next. As I mentioned, retaining walls will have to be constructed in order to ensure 4:1 maximum slope per our standards behind the retaining wall for drainage reasons. The material of the retaining wall will be a dry stack material, chosen because of its durability, easier for homeowners to repair compared to concrete, and has a better aesthetic for residential settings. However, we will not know the exact look of the dry stack material for this project until we have the contractor on board, but we provided a standard example of what dry stack is on the screen here for reference. Next. A 5-foot tree lawn will also be installed next to the sidewalks on Florida and Iowa using crusher fine material. This tree lawn is meant to help with traffic calming and more comfort for pedestrians walking on the sidewalk. Crusher fines were chosen because it is permeable, it's low maintenance, ADA compliant, and does not easily wash away into our storm drains. We're also putting back an irrigation sleeve under the sidewalk for abutting property owners to install an irrigation system if they so choose. Next. This project also had very close coordination with our forestry department, where we had numerous conversations, site visits with forestry during the design phase of the project in order to minimize tree removals as much as possible. Again, all of the trees we are talking about for the project are in the public right-of-way and under the purview of the city forester's office. Fortunately, with our partnership with forestry, we were able to minimize impacts to trees as much as possible. Major reasons why forestry would authorize a tree removal is large in part due to the tree health or species type. And finally, forestry wanted to be sure you all were aware of a program they offer to City and County of Denver residents where you may apply for installation of a free street tree within the public right-of-way by following this link on the screen. Next. With that, I'm going to hand it back to R.O.W, walk us through our first Q&A about this material we've discussed so far. And again, thank you for joining us tonight.
All right, we do have a few questions here. So we have a question, a couple questions on sidewalks. We can start with those. We have a note or a comment, and we can see if anybody wants to address this. So Brianna does note that the existing sidewalks are very narrow, and most of the kids have to walk single file. So you see a lot of children walking in the streets. Is there any comment on that you guys want to make? Otherwise, we do have a question from her as well.
I'm happy to chime in a little. Brendan, you're also welcome to jump in. We definitely recognize that there are a lot of sidewalks in the city that do not meet our current standards and are definitely narrower, et cetera, and causes condition. Unfortunately, we are very constrained by budget. And so our priority currently for our sidewalk program is to build the gaps. So build them where no sidewalk exists. And so that's really what we're focusing on right now. And as Brendan showed in that one map, you could see just in Cory Merrill alone, there's quite a lot of gaps that we have just in one neighborhood. So we have an entire city that we're working on addressing. So unfortunately, we won't be getting to widening sidewalks, but I will say that when when properties do redevelop, we do require they build to our current standards. So that would be a wider sidewalk.
Great, thank you, Ashley. Okay, so we have another question here. So why are the sidewalks, this one's for Brendan, why are the sidewalks not extending down Florida to South High as part of the Safe Routes to School project? So many students walk up Florida from Wash Park to Merrill, and wouldn't this give equal access to both neighborhoods? So in terms of access and equity, how can we respond to that?
Yeah, so that's, a really great question. And kind of, as I mentioned a little bit in my content, a lot of it came down to where could we minimize our impacts to forestry, excel, and other conditions such as that, and budget. So again, this is one of the first projects where we're going in and really filling gaps, retrofitting gaps in a very mature neighborhood. So there were a lot of things that we had to consider as far as policy, what would best meet our design, and what would most mitigate any forestry, excel, or other impacts. So that's why we're building that section of Florida, but that is a really great point and a great question.
Great, thank you. We have a question about the bike lanes. We can ask that one now because it does relate to Florida. So why aren't the bike lanes extending to South High School all the way down Florida?
So yeah, we'll cover that in the next section, but it does, the bike lane will go from Florida and Steele where the current bike lane ends, and it does extend to Race, which is where Florida dead ends in kind of the eastern side of South High School, that larger campus area. So we do take it all the way to Race Street. So I'll show that as well on the map.
Yeah, thanks. Jump the gun a little bit there, but thanks for addressing that, Ashley. Okay, so we have another question from Frank. If you are so intent on meeting cost savings, why, one, are the sidewalks on both sides of Iowa, and two, so deep at 10 feet?
Yeah, so the sidewalks on Iowa, again, were identified as gaps in our Go-Bond program, and they were prioritized because of their close proximity to transit stations on University. So that's why those segments in particular were prioritized, and we were able to group those into the project for Cory Merrill, and the sidewalks going on Florida, again, to help with packaging, project coordination, and cost savings for the entire project. And the standards that we're building on Iowa will be the exact same sidewalk standards that we're building on Florida.
Great, thank you. We have a follow-up question to that then from Frank. So why not just put the sidewalks next to the street and eliminate the 5-foot tree buffer line?
Yep, so the 5-foot tree lawn and the 5-foot sidewalk, again, are what our Denver Peds and Trails standard is that we have to follow. And that is what the city will be building for sidewalks, as well as what we hold our private developers to build to as well. And that's where that cross-section came from.
Okay, thank you. It looks like we maybe have a repeat question. It looks like Diane was maybe asking the same question. Do we have any more in the queue? Let's see, we'll give it another minute here. We've got about 4 more minutes left in this section for questions. So if there's anybody else who's like to ask a question to Brendan of the sidewalks, particularly along Florida at this point, we can finish up with your question here. Okay, so we do have another question. There is no one walking to the bus on University. You've done no studies. This is total waste of money and material. So it looks like there's a concern that there hasn't been a study done on University regarding the usage of the sidewalks.
I mean, that there's a lot of reasons that we build those sidewalk gaps to our transit stops. Denver is very committed to our Mayor's Mobility Action Plan, which is really looking at how can we can make it safer and more comfortable for people to use, to walk more, to use transit more, to bike more. And in order to do that, we need to build facilities so people feel safe and comfortable. And so building out the sidewalks that are part of the Elevate Bond program on Iowa are part of that. So we do believe that there is a need to build more sidewalks to these transit stops. And this is, one of many locations throughout the city where we focus on what's called kind of that first mile, last mile, making sure that as folks get, especially towards those high injury network streets, which university is one of them, that they have a safe place to be so they're not in the middle of the street. So, you know, we didn't necessarily go out and monitor the amount of people walking to and from those transit stops today. However, you know, we are also working on promoting and encouraging more people to use them moving forward. So this is an important part of that.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. I think that might be it here in the Q&A for now. I think we've got, yeah, we'll move on to the bike lanes.
Great. Once again, thank you, Afor, and hello, everyone. It's me again. So I'm here to talk about the bike lanes. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, one of the improvements we'll be making is the installation of a bike lane on Florida from Race or South High School, connecting to the existing buffered bike lane that begins at the intersection of Florida and Steele. That bike lane that picks up at Florida and Steele connects all the way over to Cook Park and really the Cherry Creek Trail. So to kick us off, I want to provide a little background on where our bike projects come from in the first place. This slide highlights some of the core documents and goals that drive many of the projects and priorities of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. They include Denver Moves Bicycle Plan and Blueprint Denver, which are part of the larger Denver Right effort and package. Denver Right is a series of documents that outline our plans, our values, our visions for land use and transportation in Denver. They follow common themes that were identified through years of community input, including well-connected, safe, and accessible places. We also have adopted the Mobility Action Plan and the Vision Zero Plan to help us prioritize and rapidly implement efforts that result in safer streets, transportation choice, congestion management, equity, and sustainability. All this to say there's been a lot of work put forward to understand Denverites' values, our priorities, et cetera, as it relates to how we can make Denver a better place for everyone. So specifically, as it relates to the bike network and our bike facilities, we have very ambitious goals that include not only increasing the number of bike facility miles, but also working to improve the safety, quality, and accessibility of our facilities. The reason for this is because currently the majority of cyclists on the roadway today are what we consider highly confident or somewhat confident cyclists. These are folks that are typically comfortable enough to ride on what we have out there today, but they really only account for about 16% of the population. So we want to do more. We want to attract more users to our bike network. And in order to do so, we need to build these safer, more accessible, more connected bike networks and facilities. And this slide speaks to one of the reasons why this and other bike projects like it are helping us attract more cyclists. A recent study conducted in the Denver metro area by Denver's Regional Council of Government, Dr. Cog, indicated that nearly 59% of the population would bike more if they felt safer or had more comfortable facilities. So by building safer, more connected facilities, we can start to encourage that 59% of folks to bike more, which helps us reach those goals we talked about on the previous slide of safer streets, transportation choice, congestion management, equity, and sustainability. This slide summarizes several of the reasons why Florida was identified through the Denver Moves process as a bike route and some of the benefits that completing this bike facility will bring. So one of the big things is it helps connect destinations in the neighborhood. It helps connect everyone from South High School to Cory Merrill campus. In terms of the bike network, this is filling an important gap in this east-west connection between Washington Park and South High School and the Cook Park Cherry Creek Trail. As I mentioned, there is a buffered bike lane from Florida to Steele. This will help fill that gap. By painting a bike lane, we also create a designated space on the road for cyclists, and it has been widely recognized that on many roads with certain volumes of traffic, when users of different speed of the right-of-way have a designated space to operate, whether you're walking at that speed or you're cycling at a cycle speed or you're driving at a, whatever that speed may be, it creates actually a safer environment for all users of the right-of-way. There's a saying out there that I think resonates with me, which is when everyone has a piece of the road, there's peace on the road, which is a little cheesy, but I think makes sense. So through the design, we are working through the best way to add pavement markings and operational improvements to help bikes also cross university, which currently can be pretty intimidating to cyclists due to the fact that there's no clear indication of where cyclists are supposed to ride in relation to cars. This slide is intended to give you a better idea of how this segment fits into the larger bike network in the area. The solid lines are existing bike facilities and the dashed lines are the proposed facilities that we're working to build out through the multiple programs we have to build bike facilities. As you can see, it's filling that gap between South High School and Race and the completed facility that starts at Steele all the way east to Cook Park. Most of you are probably familiar with what Florida looks like today, but this is just a reminder. There's currently parking on the south side of the road and then 2 travel lanes, no parking on the north side of the road. Pretty much all homes on the corridor are on corner lots and the majority of homes face the intersecting street. Not all, but the majority. So whenever we consider installing a bike lane that would require parking removal within the public right-of-way, we start with a parking utilization study to make sure we properly understand the parking needs along the corridor. As part of the study, we collect data at 3 different times of day. As you can see, the parking utilization is rather low, less than 20%. However, we understand that no matter how low utilization is, there's always concerns when we're talking about removing parking within the right-of-way. At Dottie, one of our primary goals is to ensure safety for all modes and users within the public right-of-way. And every project comes with a series of discussions about these trade-offs and what will help us best reach our goals. In this case, we considered a number of factors. 1, we have received a number of concerns about speeding along the corridor, along Florida. One thing that has been demonstrated to lead to higher speeds is wider lanes. A low parking utilization tends to make drivers feel like the lane is wider than it actually is, which makes them feel more comfortable driving at higher speeds. So by installing the bike lane, we are helping to narrow the road on both sides of the road, which help to mitigate any of those potential speeding issues. Second, as we discussed, creating a designated space for all users, especially those of different speeds, is a proven way to increase safety. Finally, in terms of parking, as I mentioned, nearly all homes on this stretch of Florida are on corner lots and can easily park on an intersecting street that most of them actually touch, their properties touch. And I say nearly because there's one home at the corner of Race in Florida that is not on a corner with an intersecting public road, but it is again across the street from Race. It also has a driveway and a garage. So with all these considerations in mind, we decided to move forward with the bike lane. We believe it provides the safest condition for the majority of users within the public right-of-way on Florida. So with all that background, this slide shows you what the bike lane on Florida is going to look like. It's pretty straightforward. We have a bike lane on both sides of the road, and then we have the 2 travel lanes in the middle. In general, Florida is pretty constrained, especially as you head west of the Steele intersection. So that'll, kind of requires we have this pretty simple design. And with that, I'm just showing you this again because now you have a little bit more context of both the sidewalks and the bike. So hopefully this graphic has a little bit more meaning to you now. And now I'm going to hand it over to Craig to wrap it up. We're going to talk about all the other projects and how they kind of fit together and the timeline, and then we will have another Q&A.
Okay, my name's Craig Long with Public Works, Dottie, recent change from Public Works. As described, we've got all these different pieces that we're putting together in what's considered a one build scenario. The timing on each of these pieces is what the one build process is supposed to help work through. The first piece that's coming for this neighborhood, our streets department is planning on milling and overlaying Florida. They're going to be going from Steele all the way down to South, I know they're going to University. I guess I'm not 100% sure if they're going down to South High. So for us to be able to build what we want to build, we don't want to cut into the new asphalt. So we're going to have them start out by putting in improvements that would require asphalt repairs prior to their milling operation. That includes handicap ramps, driveway connections into Florida, the bulb out at Steele in Florida, so that once those concrete pieces are built, then they can mill and overlay the street and you'll have a new surfacing, not a cut up surfacing. Once they get that done, in the process of that, will also being some open trenching for the new traffic signal that'll be at Steele and Florida. That'll be also covered up by this new asphalt surfacing. Once they get done with that, then later, and that's going to, well, let me step back. The mill and overlay should be starting relatively soon, like this spring. Once they get through that part, we've got to move some Excel poles that are in our way as far as where we're going to put in the new concrete work. So as we're getting that done, they'll still continue to doing the mill and overlay. Later on in the season, that's going to be about middle of the summer. Later on in the season, in the fall, we'll have a concrete contractor on board, and we'll come in and put in the sidewalk work along Florida, and also we'll do all of the sidewalk work over on Iowa. That's generally the schedule. In fact, this slide indicates that process. So just to kind of restate it, spring, we're doing this engagement of the local community members. Early spring, we're going to finalize design. Midsummer, the ADA ramps, mill and overlay. And then in the fall, the construction of the sidewalks. Next.
That's it.
All right, so we do have a couple questions. One, I would like to readdress Brianna's question because it sounds like she got dropped off the call, and I think this could be a good opportunity to kind of talk again really quick about the equity and access. So if we are able to answer that for her again, she'd greatly appreciate it. So Brendan, if you want to talk about the sidewalks again, extending down Florida to South High as part of the Safe Routes to School project. She was mentioning that many students walk up Florida from Wash Park to Merrill, and she was asking about the equity and access to both neighborhoods.
Yeah, again, that was a really great question. And there were a lot of things that we had to consider for this project as far as filling in gaps along Florida. A lot of that came down to budget, came down to forestry concerns, came down to Excel impacts. So where can we minimize those the most? And this project is also setting a precedent for us to build sidewalks in neighborhoods that are already mature neighborhoods. So with all of that, we weren't able to extend it all the way down to Florida. We had to prioritize the gaps that we could make sure were closest to the school, and really made sure that we were prioritizing the gaps the community prioritized highest when we were out doing that engagement in 2018, which was that section there from Clayton to Steele on Florida. So that was a major reason why we are doing those segments on Florida. But again, that is a really great question that you brought up, and it was something that we really did consider in this project as we moved forward.
Great. Thank you for that. We have some people kind of wondering, you know, with the concerns on impacts and trade-offs, can we explain a little bit about what some of the next steps are and how we involve the community any further moving forward? Does the project go to City Council if there's a lot of people who are not, you know, excited about the trade-offs? What are some of the next steps as it relates to community engagement going forward?
So this is, we had our majority of the community outreach did occur back in 2018, and a lot of the listening occurred then. This project is slated to move forward. You are welcome to share your feedback and concerns, or if there's something that we have drastically missed, you can email Brendan. His email, here, let me just move to the next slide, is up, and we will definitely consider that. I mean, I think that, you know, again, I know that parking in particular is the trade-off most people are typically concerned about, and you know, we're definitely open to having that conversation and learning more about what the concerns are. And we have a number of bike projects moving throughout the city, and there have been specific parking concerns that we have found ways to creatively address through design. But again, in general, we are moving forward with this idea of, or not the idea, the intent of building out a really well-connected, accessible bike network in the city. And we recognize there are trade-offs with what that means for the right-of-way, but we are really working to ensure that we are putting the right-of-way to the highest and best use for the majority of users. So if you want, you're welcome to email myself or Brendan. Our emails are here. You can also always email your council representative, Councilman Cashman. He has always been a wonderful advocate for the community and makes sure we are very aware of what their concerns and frustrations, ideas, thoughts are, etc. So.
Great. Yes, thank you, Ashley. And I do see it, Councilman Cashman did kind of reiterate that desire to hear a little bit more about that outreach process that has occurred. And so I don't know if you can talk a little bit more about what kind of meetings or participation has happened in the past regarding the project, just to kind of highlight that a little bit more for Councilman.
Sure. I mean, I will say that 2018, that outreach was led by a different team. So unfortunately, none of us that are on your call today were a part of that because staff turnover, et cetera, not just turnover, but folks moving on to wonderful positions. So we have kind of inherited project with all of the community outreach that was identified, and that slide that Brendan showed, I think was really a good summary of what we had seen. We have also done some outreach. We flyered everybody on the corridor about a month and a half ago on Florida that will be impacted by the sidewalk project, as well as on Iowa, and invited them to a meeting so we could talk through what the sidewalk project looks like and what it'll mean for them and their sent to the sidewalk. We've contacted the R&O. We've reached out to Councilman Cashman to help us get the word out about this public meeting. But yeah, that kind of summarizes that.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. Thank you, Ashley. We do have another question for you regarding the bikes. There is, and this is from Candace. She's asking, or she's first stating that there is an unsafe bike route across I-25 at the intersection at Mexico over the interstate. And she's wondering, are there any north-south improvements planned?
That is a great question. Let's see. She said Mexico and I-25.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know off the top of my head if there are any improvements planned for that. We have so many bike projects moving currently. I am happy to dig into what we've got going. And sorry, I pulled up the wrong map. But Candace, please definitely feel free to send me an email and we can have some follow-up on that. We do have a large effort called the South Central Community Transportation Network effort, which is looking at a lot of these bike lanes you see here, especially those on the left-hand side of the screen, and looking at working towards implementing those. And so as far as north-south connections, I can definitely look into that. We could talk more, but I'd say that the biggest one is the one on, I want to say that's Franklin. But as far as Steel Street goes, I don't think we have any major improvements planned there. I'm blanking on where Mexico is. I apologize. But anyway, Candace, please do feel free to reach out to me because our bike team is always looking to hear more feedback and advice on what the needs are of the community and working on implementing as much as we can. So my email is here and I can help us connect with the bike team.
Great. Thank you. We've got time for a few more questions here. If you have some, please jot them down in the Q&A. We've got a few minutes here. Let's see. Okay. Well, if we're not getting any more questions coming in, we do have a question about another additional meeting, I think, that was mentioned, Ashley. Is there a date for that? I'm not sure exactly what that's referencing here, but I guess there was a meeting that we mentioned and we're wondering if there's a date that's been planned for this meeting.
At this point, we do not have any future meetings planned. We had a meeting in the past about, what was that, 4 weeks ago? That was meant specifically for homeowners along the corridor where we're building the sidewalks. But we recorded that meeting. We were recording this meeting. Folks can distribute it. But between those two, I think we've covered all the information we have to share at this point, and construction will begin shortly. So I think prior to construction, we will typically flyer one more time, but at this point, I don't believe we have any more meetings planned.
All right, and it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So I guess with that, we want to wrap up the evening here. Yeah, so no more questions coming in. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. Again, we've got some contact information here for you. Brendan and Ashley will be available to answer your questions. The website again is denvergov.org/SRTS, where there will be the recording that Ashley has mentioned and some other materials available after the meeting.
I would say, please do give us about 10 business days to make sure we've uploaded everything and have also created an FAQ or fact sheet to distribute to everyone. So it won't be available tomorrow, but within the next 10 business days.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Have a good evening.
Wonderful. Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.